Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. So great to be here. I am Hannah, and I lead Good Deeds Day, an international network and movement of doing good around the world. And I want to first introduce our fellow panelists and the topic that we're going to start today off with. But first, I'd just like to share that we're very excited to be here. We've just spent the last 2 days in Madrid learning, talking, and sharing about strengthening volunteering, strengthening civic service, and doing good in our communities. We come from 22 countries. We're about 40 people, and it's really great to be here for the corporate section of the conference. So thank you for welcoming us. We spent time as well discussing corporate volunteering and what that really looks like in all of our countries and what that looks like as a globe. So today we're going to get deeper into what that looks like regionally and globally. We're going to be hearing some of the unique challenges, and maybe we'll come up with some solutions or ideas to get to these solutions. We'll see. And I'd like to first start with introducing Erik Montoya from Bogotá.
Hola, yo voy a hablar en español, me queda un poco más fácil. Muy buenos días a todos, agradeciendo por supuesto a Voluntariado y la invitación que nos hacen. Pues es un placer para mí estar acá. Yo soy el director del Foro de Presidentes y Mentoría en la Cámara de Comercio de Bogotá. Desde ahí venimos trabajando en tratar de articular las iniciativas de voluntariado que hay alrededor del país. Si bien es cierto, distintas compañías en Colombia vienen adelantando temas de voluntariado, también es cierto que no hay nadie que esté aglutinando y que genere un gran movimiento alrededor del voluntariado. Ese es el rol que hemos descubierto y la oportunidad donde estamos trabajando desde la Cámara de Comercio. Hoy tenemos una red de voluntarios bastante numerosa, nos estamos acercando a un número de 1000 voluntarios, todos a nivel de presidentes, gerentes, primero, segundo y hasta tercer nivel de organizaciones que se involucran en el fortalecimiento de pequeños y medianos negocios como una estrategia de generar calidad de vida. Y eso es parte de la historia que les vengo a contar hoy. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you. Sorry, I have the translation, so it's a few seconds behind. We'll put this down. For everyone, the translation is on channel 2, in case you need. Thank you very much, Erik. And Marina comes from Brazil. She's a representative of the JUNTOS network of corporate volunteering in Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to speak in Portuguese, right? Just joking. Do you have the translation there, people? So thank you so much for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I was invited to talk a little about network. So it's a corporate volunteer network that started with 6 networkings about volunteers to promote and enrich this theme just in Brazil, Latin America, and Europe. So we do believe that having a network is, we cannot keep the volunteers and ideas and all this knowledge just for one network. We want to sprout these ideas. So the main idea of this network is to share knowledge and make it growth. So that's why we're going to talk a little bit about this, what transformations we can do in a network. And thank you so much.
Thank you. And we have Christine Schoppe. She is the Chief of Staff of Points of Light, a global organization.
Wonderful. I know you received a very robust intro to Points of Light from Natalie, but yes, I'm from Points of Light. We work with about 250 companies every year, and there are about 17,000 NGO and nonprofit partners to make sure that companies and those nonprofit partners are meeting community needs, and Points of Light is there to support them. So just look forward to talking more about corporate volunteerism in the sector.
Thank you, Christine. And we have Shalabh Sahai. He's the co-founder and director of iVolunteer in India.
Buenos dias, and hello from India. My name is Shalabh, and I work with iVolunteer. iVolunteer basically does 3 things. The first is enabling. The second is activation, and the third is inspiring. So we enable volunteers, corporate partners, volunteer managers, NGO workers to be able to work with volunteers and make volunteering more impactful. We create programs where people, volunteers can engage themselves, and then we work on reward mechanisms and finding stories and models that inspire more volunteering across the country. We do this with about 20,000 volunteers and about 200 NGOs every year, and a number of corporates. I'm happy to be here, excited, and looking forward to share a little bit more.
Thank you, Shalabh. And finally, not joined in person, but we will hear from her on the screen in just a minute. We have Lorrie Foster from Yave. She's the Global Director of Corporate Strategy at Yave, which is also an international organization. So we will start our first presentation from Lorrie, who will be on the screen here.
Hello, my name is Lorrie Foster, and I'm very pleased to be able to speak with you today, even if only virtually. A team of researchers working with the International Association for Volunteer Effort just completed a 2-year project on corporate volunteering. We analyze programs throughout the world to be able to define the global state of health of corporate volunteering and to suggest an agenda for the future. To do this, we interviewed representatives from 80 companies headquartered in 32 countries, plus nearly 100 leaders from NGOs, consultancies, plus academics. Based on our findings, I would like to suggest 5 key trends that define the state of health of corporate volunteering globally. First of all, the last 2 years have been a crisis throughout the world, without a doubt. But corporate volunteering emerged from these 2 years as extremely resilient. Employees spontaneously acted locally to help their neighbors with food, with errands. They went to food pantries to pack food. They contributed blood at blood drives. And they often would tell their companies what they were doing, and corporate volunteer managers acted to encourage these actions and to do even more. For example, our friends at Iberdrola worked with employee volunteers to design masks for those who had trouble hearing, so they could read lips through the masks. Employees at CaixaBank and Telefonica reached out to isolated, lonely, elderly, and disabled individuals and corresponded with them, sent them videos, did things to keep them engaged. We saw a lot of support for NGOs. One bank in the United States worked to support an NGO through coaching. Their executives would coach the leaders of these NGOs on financial planning, on leadership issues, and also on business continuity. In Latin America, we saw evidence of a company who engaged their employee volunteers to coach very small businesses in Peru so that they could stay solvent during the pandemic and even thrive. Secondly, in addition to this resilience, we saw a tremendous amount of innovation. And we saw that companies embrace the big tent concept of corporate volunteering. Now, Big Tent was established by my colleague and co-author, Ken Allen, when he wrote the book, The Big Tent, several years ago. And this refers to volunteering that involves everyone in a vast majority of ways. And what we saw during the pandemic and also beyond was that employees were volunteering in all sorts of ways, and including their family, their friends, retirees. Now, this is fairly common in Spain, I know, but throughout the world, we saw people doing this. They would include not only their family, their friends, and retirees, but customers, suppliers, and community members. And we see this as a good sign to include more and more people in volunteering. Thirdly, we've seen the growth of virtual volunteering. Now, of course, most all volunteering shut down in person during the pandemic, and virtual volunteering was in many cases the only option. But it wasn't that easy because not all NGOs had the same compatibility, technologically speaking, with companies. In some parts of the world, Wi-Fi is not universally available. So this was a challenge, but companies were there to meet the challenge. And what we saw with virtual volunteering was that employees who weren't always able to volunteer prior to the pandemic and in person were able now to volunteer. We saw, for example, one medical device company who had a very well-established 15-year cross-border program, adjusted it to be virtual, and new employees who never could have gone abroad for 2, 3, 4 weeks were now able to participate in the program. We also saw the rise of some really innovative team volunteering virtually. One company had a volunteer power hour where they involved 44 locations on the same day, all volunteering for 5 different causes at the same time. And this was such a success that they now do it on a quarterly basis. Finally, I should add that micro-volunteering also became possible with virtual volunteering. So for example, somebody could translate a passage of a children's book in a few minutes, or they could use an app called Be My Eyes and help a blind person through an app locate and identify what was happening in their home. So lots of new possibilities opened up with virtual volunteering. Fourth, we saw a big increase in skills-based volunteering. I would say without exception, every company we interviewed plans to increase their skills-based volunteering. And we see this as good. I mean, skills-based volunteering gives NGOs skills they wouldn't normally be able to afford. It gives employees a chance to develop their personal and professional skills. And it helps companies understand what is possible in terms of perhaps new products and services or new markets. So skills-based volunteering is on the rise. And I would say that what we'd like to see is consistency, which is very important. And also a way to think about skills-based volunteering as more than just what people sitting at a desk do. For example, the Marriott company has their chefs volunteer to teach culinary skills to youth in different parts of the world. And they also teach those skills to refugees or other underrepresented populations. In Korea, a steel company, POSCO, their employees will volunteer to use their scuba diving skills to clean bodies of water in the area and to keep them clean on a very regular basis. So we encourage companies to think about skills in a very expansive way. Finally, a trend we also saw throughout the world is that young people are really propelling their companies to do more and more energetic volunteering. They're encouraging the use of technology in a variety of ways, and they're also encouraging volunteering in climate-related initiatives. Finally, we would also say that young people are leading the spontaneous volunteering and the grassroots initiatives that are important to them. So in conclusion, I would say that based on our many interviews, we saw a great resilience, a lot of innovativeness, and a lot of energy going towards corporate volunteering. What we would like to see is even more volunteering. The needs around the world are immense, and we would like to see a consistent application of employee volunteering, as well as more targeting of the Sustainable Development Goals and programs designed to support the goals. And finally, a greater effort at measuring the true impact of corporate volunteering. Thank you for listening to me today. I hope you have a terrific conference, and look for our report, which is Corporate Volunteering for a Post-Pandemic World, which will be available on June 14th. Thank you.
To continue the topic of trends in the world, we'll go to Christine.
Absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to that research on the 14th. That seems incredible work. And I think a lot of my comments will actually underscore what Lorrie is saying, what the data is really saying. And so the first thing I would say is I would +1 the virtual volunteering. And I know so many of you are like, oh, but we're just getting our employees back to in-person opportunities. But what I would back up with Points of Light's research that supports what Lorrie was saying is that Points of Light's research from April said that 74% of people said they would do virtual volunteering over the next 30 days. So we know that's still a very prevalent form of volunteering. We know that it is based upon the COVID impact in an area or in a country, and everyone is at a different point right now. But similar to what Lorrie said, we would underscore, particularly with the employees that companies have access to, particularly employees that are in the office place, that provides the flexibility and the ability to engage asynchronously and in ways like that. But similar to what Lorrie would say, virtual volunteering isn't the full answer. It is more likely a hybrid model that we are going to see in the future as we move forward, because we have employees who don't, as she indicated, have access to the internet, who are retail workers or other people that don't have necessary computer access all the time. So we will see a more hybrid model as we move forward. So I would definitely +1 what Lorrie says there. What I would also say is the trends we are seeing in the general workplace environment, the trends towards work-life balance, flexibility, the trends towards mental health are the trends that we're going to see in the corporate volunteering design. We need to make sure we're increasing our flexibility in our program design, a design that works with all sorts of life situations that someone might be in, their work-life situation, which is numerous. So we need to make sure we're designing for everyone, which can feel complex, but again, flexibility. And also in terms of mental health and wellness, we know that there is a volunteering high, for a lack of better term. So how are we actually understanding the joy and the satisfaction that is coming from how we are engaging our employees? And that matters. We do want to know the social impact, and we do want to know those pieces, but we really want to understand the value to the employee and their well-being, and we know that will make them better employees and be retained as employees. So I would say that as well. What I understand was a potential theme in yesterday's conference was actually about how do we measure social impact and get better as a sector, and I mean from the corporate point of view and the NGO point of view, how do we actually understand the social impact we have? And what I would say to that is, and I always credit where credit is due, Natalie often says this equation, which is data plus stories equals impact. And so when we're thinking about social impact, we should be thinking about both of those elements and both of those parts of the equation, data plus stories. What I would say from the data perspective, and truthfully, data collection, data reporting, data measurement, it takes time and it takes investment. And so I have an ask of the companies in the room, which would be the next time you're engaging with your nonprofit partners, ask them, what would it take for good measurement? It takes resources, and it often takes time and patience to see the full effect of an intervention. And so definitely partner with them and know that the results might not necessarily come right away, and it might require a little bit more investment to achieve that, and also your partnership in defining that. So I would say that, and then also the stories portion of that, that puts a name and a face to the work that we're doing, and that that provides the inspiration and the just the connection to community. And so when we are thinking about the proof and the evidence that we want, it needs to come with both numbers and stories, is what I would say. And then finally, I definitely agree with Lorrie in terms of we need more volunteering and corporate volunteering. Our companies and our workplace is where we spend the majority of our life, for better or worse. That's the majority of our day, so we know that you have the power to influence how people have the time and opportunity to engage in community. So yes, definitely want more volunteers, but to kind of emphasize what Natalie said this morning, we want to encourage people to, we want companies to be a place where people can have the opportunity to engage in all the ways that they have access to through the civic circle. How can companies support using their voice, opportunities for education on an issue area that matters to your company, how you can influence your matching programs through the donations they make. So we want to make sure that we're providing a robust and complete and expansive engagement opportunity for all our employees. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. And I actually would love to hear if you could have a specific example of a company that Points of Light works with that might be responsive to one of these trends.
Yeah. You know what I would really say, and what Points of Light really appreciates, I'm going to go with the data plus stories piece. One of our partners, and Rick Bell, who's in the audience, is the connector of that partner is Starbucks. And not only are they focused on the measurement and storytelling piece for themselves, but of course they want to be able to communicate Starbucks' impact in the story they're telling, but they want to answer the measurement question for the sector. And how can we say this is the methodology and the process for impact storytelling, for impact measurement, because it's not just a question that we as Starbucks have, but that we as a sector and a corporate sector have. And so I would say they are reaching out to other companies, and how do we collaborate on that to push that forward? And I would say more partnerships that look like that to answer the big questions that we know we all have are just great examples of what I enjoy seeing in the corporate space.
Amazing. Thank you, Christine. We'll now go to Shalabh.
Yeah. So I think, wonderful comments, and it's very much kind of, exactly in line of what we have been also observing in our part of the world, in India and across Asia as well. I do feel that, a lot of what we've seen in the recent times is companies who are looking at volunteering also as a tool for leadership and development, which moves it up the value chain from purely as a tool for community change to actually seeing a change within the organization as well, which is where it starts aligning much more with the business and the strategy, and possibly with the people function much more deeply than kind of, as an auxiliary CSR role. And that's a big change that we've been seeing. Why is it happening, and what are they looking forward to? So I think the first, one of the earliest examples that we had was when some companies actually approached us by where they wanted to go to the rural markets, and whereas most of their employees were actually coming from the really big urban, big metropolitan cities. Now, how do you expect, employees who've never seen the rural part of the country to establish markets over there? And so simply as a development tool, kind of, for people to learn, market acquisition, I think that was the first one that we saw almost about 10, 12 years back. And this was happening not just with companies within India looking at rural markets, but even at companies who were multinationals who were coming from outside of India and wanting to understand India better. Some of them initially sent more volunteers before actually the businesses started growing locally over there. The second is we realized that in nonprofits and in volunteering, we present a very unstructured situation of how to deal with things. And I think for a lot of companies and a lot of employees who are kind of, who have initially worked in very structured environments, but as they keep on rising up the ladder, they have to face more and more unstructured situations. This experience is extremely valuable and is kind of, useful for them actually. The third is, I realize, is influence without authority. There's no boss out there, there's no manager out there when you're working with the community, when you're volunteering. Your opinion is not the only opinion. Your opinion is not the final opinion. You can't tell somebody this is, even if you know or if you believe that this is the right thing to do, it won't happen unless everybody else or the right people, the other stakeholders also agree and come on board. So how do you influence without authority? And I think volunteering teaches you the best this without, I don't think there's any parallel out there. And then the other aspect is humility and empathy. Especially kind of as people are growing, they are responsible for more teams within the organization. They're responsible for more vendors. They're responsible for more partners. In every which case, it does involve a person at the other end of the table or sitting next to you. And if you do not understand their positions, if you do not, then it's not going to be a working relationship. And so I find that humility and empathy is something that as part of leadership development is growing as well. But then I think some of our experiences where we tried doing things slightly differently. One example that comes to mind is we did something called as Dine and Dialogue. It was very simple. We invited a group of corporate professionals, mid-career professionals, and we asked them to come simply for dinner with a fisher men communities, women. So fishermen communities, women, it's odd. But fisher women's community, let's say. So it's a so they lived like in little hutments on the side of the coast, we just said that one evening, come down over there, and we requested the women over there to just cook, instead of one meal for themselves, just cook 2 extra meals for people who are coming in. And we said nothing special, whatever you do for yourself, just cook 2 extra portions of it, as simple as that. And it's a small community, so hutments are all close by. We simply got these corporate managers to come and sit down and share this food with them. There was no agenda. It was just this, that just come, share food, share experiences. What we realized that when you sit down, and you're sitting obviously down on the floor, you're eating with your hands, you're eating from the plate, the food that is maybe unfamiliar to you, but when you're doing that, it's a very, the experience brings everyone at the same level. It is no longer that I'm volunteering to help somebody else out there. And from there, the conversations begin, from food to life to the place where they're living, and you start understanding, what life and its challenges are about. And that's when the connect has happened, possibly volunteering can automatically develop on its own without possibly us playing any role in it. So we realized that, pilots like that simply, sometimes we try and structure things too much. And I spoke about all the structure just a little while back. But sometimes you need to kind of break it down to extremely simple things. Just bring people together, provide space so that they can talk as equals, and I think more can happen. And the other part is, we realized that specifically as we saw during the pandemic time, as volunteering grows, as corporate volunteering grows, the appetite to do more and more varied things is out there. And sometimes we are restricted by the older models of voluntary engagement that we've always followed. It's always in a structured, through structured programs, it's always through a NGO partner. But how can we kind of, open beyond these? How can we challenge some of the pre-existing notions and see, can you do something else? Okay, what can you do within your own workspace? 4 or 5 of us sitting on this stage. Is this something that we can do over here that is still volunteering and that we just decide within ourselves? So what can we do over there? How do you challenge each individual employee in a company to say that, okay, forget the NGO partner, forget the CSR pillars for a moment. I'm not saying forget entirely, but look at yourself and what is your role in your community, in your office. For example, with one little company, they felt that they were extremely good with environment and being a zero, I forget the right term for it, and they said that no, we can help everyone outside. We said, why don't you talk to your supply chain people and the facility management people right there? These are managers talking to us, and we just simply created an interaction between the facility management people and these managers. And they started looking within, that okay, within my own company premises, what more is possible before I start offering something outside. So I think there's a lot of this that is happening, and I think these are some of the changes that we like to see. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Shalabh. And talking about different ways of volunteering, structured versus unstructured, and everything in the middle, what role does volunteer recognition play within companies? And maybe you could speak also about recognizing in the unstructured as well.
Yeah, interesting. So yeah, I think volunteer recognition, at least in India, plays a huge role because where we come from, usually volunteering is much lower down the priority. And so it's after the boss and after the work and after the wife and after whatever else is happening in your life that volunteering possibly comes down to. And a lot of times it's also, so when things go unrecognized, you don't find a very positive environment to work on. So we feel that when you actually provide for recognition within a company, it's suddenly that employees actually start feeling that, okay, this is something worth doing. And when they start feeling it is something worth doing, then it does happen. But there are different ways of recognition. Obviously, the most common ways of recognition are creating a recognition platform and kind of giving awards. That's the most common way. But I find that what works best is more for personal recognition. So for example, if we had someone doing a great work and if we wrote an email to their manager saying, hey, this team member of yours or this couple of team members of yours, they did amazing project that helped this nonprofit in a very impactful way. And the manager goes and thanks that team in person. it is not done again in a very structured format, but you have to find that, okay, who's the right influencer. And so a lot of times, also one of the things I remember is this was one big Indian company, and we had begun a lot of pro bono projects. And the pro bono projects had begun, but they were not getting finished up. And we tried to figure, okay, what will make it kind of them meet the right end. And we realized that the managing director of the company was much, much higher up and always never available to the level of people that we were talking to. So we said, okay, why don't we incentivize that, okay, if you've done this, then the recognition will be with the MD, and you'll possibly have a lunch with the MD. And so that kind of, moved the needle. So you have to identify what recognition means at different companies and different work cultures. There are old economy companies, there are new economy companies, there are multinationals, there are local companies, small companies, large companies. We have to find that the right way, but it works wonderfully.
Great, thank you, Shalabh.
Thank you.
Let's go to Erik.
Thank you, Hannah. Ok, pues voy a empezar contando que desde la Cámara de Comercio, o digamos la experiencia que nosotros tenemos para contar es distinta, porque está muy enfocada en un voluntariado netamente profesional. Pero más allá de eso, digamos que las experiencias que se vienen recorriendo son muy similares en muchos campos. Por supuesto, el voluntariado social y el voluntariado orientado a lo medioambiental van a ir relacionados de una u otra forma. Pero para nosotros ha sido importante, desde nuestra razón de ser como organización, ver cómo contribuíamos a que más empresas se mantuvieran en el mercado, y esa era nuestra preocupación inicialmente. Y empezamos desde, digamos, a partir de una experiencia que se tuvo con presidentes y gerentes de compañías, a entender que existía una oportunidad muy interesante en el tiempo que se donaba para contribuir justamente al crecimiento de las organizaciones. De ahí se creó hace ya varios años en Bogotá y en Colombia una iniciativa muy interesante que se llama el Foro de Presidentes, que nos fue dando la línea de lo que teníamos que hacer. ¿Y por qué cuento esa experiencia? Porque empezamos a encontrar una palabra que para nosotros significa hoy todo lo que son los esfuerzos de voluntariado, y es trascender. La palabra de trascender, digamos que está en lo más alto de las necesidades de la humanidad. Y hemos visto cómo cada uno de los voluntarios que se vincula hoy a la red, pues realmente lo mueve un espíritu básico de poder contribuir a la sociedad y dejar de cierta forma su marca dentro de lo que termina siendo pues su aporte en la sociedad. De ahí hoy hemos podido venir avanzando en, sobre todo, trabajar en que los negocios perduren en el tiempo. Y hemos logrado vincular muchos profesionales que hoy dan micro mentorías, micro voluntariados de 1 hora, 30 minutos, donde se sientan con empresarios de pequeños y medianos negocios a escucharlos, a entender y a entregar tres temas básicamente: un tema de experiencia, un tema de conocimiento y por supuesto los contactos que hay alrededor de esto. Para un empresario de la micro o pequeña empresa es muy difícil muchas veces acceder a ese conocimiento, o es costoso. Hoy, bajo la estrategia de voluntariado que la adelantamos con cerca de ya 10 compañías grandes del país en Colombia, tenemos acceso a más de 600 ejecutivos de primero, segundo y hasta tercer nivel. Se acompañan emprendedores, se acompañan empresarios, se acompañan incluso estudiantes universitarios que quieren sacar adelante su negocio. Y básicamente lo que creemos es que a través de esto contribuimos a generar sostenibilidad en las empresas. Es decir, nuestro enfoque hoy es muy desde el voluntariado empresarial. ¿Qué retos nos acompañan? Y es que no nos podemos quedar solamente en esto. Somos conscientes que después de la pandemia necesariamente los ESGs empiezan a tener una participación importante en la concepción de los negocios. Ahora, una vez hemos generado como la importancia, o hemos logrado poner en el mindset de las personas la importancia del voluntariado, el siguiente reto es ver cómo involucramos todos los ESGs dentro de esa estrategia de voluntariado a nivel país. Creemos firmemente que, digamos, en la medida en que hayan más y mejores empresas, en la medida en que hayan más personas involucradas en esa generación de más y mejores empresas, por supuesto, el país puede crecer. Y esa es la apuesta que hay detrás de todo esto. Digamos que es un voluntariado que tiene un foco y un fin para fines netamente empresariales. pero que por supuesto detrás de esto lo que hay es cómo contribuimos a generar unas mejores condiciones en el entorno que capaciten, que fortalezcan y que le den al país esa posibilidad de crecer.
Thank you, Erik. Thank you for sharing. I'd love to hear a little bit about how the different ways of volunteering that you spoke about, these different ways, how does that contribute to the prosperity of society and perhaps to the SDGs?
Thank you, Hannah. Muy en línea con lo que estaba mencionando anteriormente, si bien es cierto, hay enfoques desde lo social y lo medioambiental que faltan aún por atender, nuestra apuesta es de mediano y largo plazo. Sin duda alguna, en la medida en que hayan más empresas mucho más sólidas, se van a generar mayores puestos de trabajo, vamos a poder vencer uno de los problemas que no solamente genera la economía latinoamericana, sino yo creo que a nivel mundial, y es la formalización de los pequeños y medianos negocios. Y en esa medida creemos firmemente que la única manera en realidad de empezar a generar prosperidad e igualdad está muy relacionada con eso, con las empresas que efectivamente encuentran un mejor sitio donde trabajar, que encuentran una mayor fortaleza y por supuesto tienen acceso a, digamos, a las mismas condiciones de experiencia, de conocimiento que cualquier otro. Es decir, que nuestra apuesta realmente es justamente esa, y es cómo hacemos la sociedad más próspera a través de las empresas. No sin esto, digamos, no siendo esto exclusivamente la finalidad, también creemos que en la medida en que el voluntariado y el voluntariado profesional sobre todo empiece a incorporar nuevos conocimientos en esos pequeños negocios, lo que estamos generando de una manera muy rápida es una diáspora de conocimiento. Es mucho más fácil contagiar a las empresas a través de terceros, a través del conocimiento de terceros. ¿Contagiarlos de qué? Contagiarlos de temas como los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, contagiarlos como la sostenibilidad en sí misma entendida como un concepto dentro de la organización, contagiarlos de la manera de entender la sostenibilidad de mediano y largo plazo entendida para ellos como la mejor y única manera de hacer los negocios. Entonces, estos profesionales en últimas nos están ayudando con la trascendencia que ellos generan con su aporte a dejar empresas preparadas para lo que hoy depara el mundo de los negocios. Y creemos pues, que justamente ese es un mecanismo muy efectivo para lograr generar condiciones de equidad, igualdad y prosperidad dentro de la sociedad.
Thank you. Thank you, Erik. Let's hear from Marina.
Yeah, I was listening. Something that Natalie told here, that we need to start listening and this. And what Erik said and my colleagues also said here is almost the same that happened in Brazil and Latin America. We have to empower companies, we have to empower their business volunteer to get straight and to empower the society and to do real actions and real impact actions, volunteer actions to the society. And that's why in Brazil they created this network in 2021. There was 6 different networks that came together to rethink the corporate volunteer, to give more power to this corporate volunteer. So we created the week, JUNTOS week, that was a week for knowledge sharing. So everything that you said about knowledge sharing, we can empower companies with this sharing. We do believe that with this network, we can create better actions and collaborative path to change ideas, to change. We saw that the pandemic changed everything. Everybody here saw how it was impacting our society. And also, we have to become more creative. Our actions need to be more creative. So this network was a huge, I say that they still don't know the big power they have in their hands, getting together and making this path and making this environment, knowledge-sharing environment to change the world, not changing just Brazil, but changing the world, because the idea of this network is about this. And in Brazil, we have very, very difficult situations, including we have people starving to death. So the society needs to wake up from that. The society needs to get together. So this pandemic, I think a lot of people just get up, how can I say, and see that, okay, I can be part of this changing in the world. And we realize that the companies are really important to make people changing. So the corporate volunteering companies are strong enough to change people, to change their employees, and to employees change the society. So the main idea of this networking is getting together, change ideas, it's a network of experts. There's a lot of people from all different organizations, companies, and also from the government that get together and understand what their needs to do. And also we have a lot of changes. We talk about online. Now we have activities, leaving the on-site activities and going to online activities, volunteer online activities. And we had a lot of these activities during the pandemic, like mentoring, helping the educational process in Brazil was a chaos. Can you imagine poor young students without going to school, and they have no internet, no access, and how we could support, how companies could support them during this process. So they get together during this week. It was during August last year, to all the knowledge they have to see how many actions you have and how much we can impact the society. And now you can understand, if you have a network working together in Brazil with all the situations we have a lot of organization and small volunteer actions in local part. But when you have the network, look into them, bringing these actions to the companies, bringing these actions, giving them power, giving them voice, we make it bigger, we make it stronger, we make, it's a way of making small actions become big actions. Like they are doing a small way, getting together, getting donations, but with all small donations, maybe we can build together a hospital, another school. So that's the main power of the network and what we saw, the changes in Brazil and Latin America. And now with Volunteer here in Europe, also bringing new ideas, how you're doing volunteer here in Europe. How can we exchange? How can we make it better?
Thank you, Marina. Could you elaborate or maybe share an example of how the network is really contributing to reducing social inequalities, maybe in Brazil or in the region?
Yes, we have a lot of, as I said before, we have a lot of small actions, but with the network, for example, I will tell you about what happened in the pandemic. We have few organizations starting with some actions like, let's get all vaccinated. Let's get out of COVID, let's do something. So these organizations get together in a network, convince companies to get together, and everybody together make it possible to happen. Like, okay, to the end of 2021, let's have people, at least the major part of the population, vaccinated against COVID. So it's kind of the examples that starting since pandemic show up. But I also can measure one, I will change a little bit, but go to gamification, but also from the pandemic, they was looking for specific actions, how to minimize the impact of pandemic, and they use gamifications also to increase and to engage volunteers to the campaigns. So there is a company in Brazil that started doing it. It's their 8th year that they are doing the same gamifications to get volunteers engaged to the program. So in that way, they were like sprouting the voice. And this volunteer could invite other volunteers, and even though the society, to participate in the same action. So we see there's a lot of companies that share the same common projects. So it's not just one company with one project. We have the same common project, and a lot of companies putting efforts to make these actions stronger and with more impact. And also, we have a problem with measuring, real measure results to that. Sometimes we don't have, we invest a lot in one action, but that action doesn't have a real impact in that society because we are not doing the right measure for that. And we do not have tools. We do not have money enough to invest that. That's why the network is helping companies also with knowledge, with providing tools and bringing experts together to share how they can change these measurements. And that would change the impact of the action.
Amazing. Thank you, Marina. We heard a little bit about the different ways in which corporates and people are volunteering in the different regions and what that looks like. Let's talk a bit about some of the challenges that you each are seeing and facing in your countries and regions, and how do we work through some of these difficulties? Let's start with Shalabh.
Yeah, I think the number one challenge for us when working on corporate volunteering is with numbers. So in India, everything is about large numbers, right? So, so in companies, when they look at employee volunteering, they want really large numbers. So, the number of employees has to be in thousands, the number of volunteer hours has to be in tens of thousands, and yet the amount of time that the company is willing to provide is very limited. So it's usually on a single or a couple of days. And so trying to concentrate those large number of hours over just a couple of days becomes the immediate challenge for us, and which is where a lot of low-end volunteering happens. What I'm talking about right now is how do we move up the value chain. So I think that is the biggest challenge for us. One way that we've been trying to work around that is by doing things like skill marathons. So for example, there's this one company for which we organized a skill marathon that we had 4 different cities on a single day. We partnered with 20 non-profits, so 5 in each of these cities. Each non-profit gave us 3 different projects. So we had 4 cities, 20 partner non-profits, 60 to 70 projects, and on an average 2 volunteers per project. So we were able to engage 150 volunteers in skills-based projects on a single day. So that's just an example of how you overcome, but that's one of the biggest challenges for us. The second big challenge, and this is a little specific to India, is we have a fantastic law that came in 2014 where every company of a certain size and above is mandated to spend 2% of its profits on CSR, corporate social responsibility. It's compulsory by the law. So that's amazing, and which has obviously both the budget available for non-profit donations has increased, and also the awareness about people's responsibility and corporate responsibility has increased multifold. But volunteering doesn't fit into that law because, like we were talking about earlier, the measurement is not there. So unless you value exactly what value can you give to that particular volunteering, you can't kind of equate it to a donation. And that value is something that everybody has to agree to. So I think that valuation of volunteering, which could possibly bring it closer to that law, is the second aspect. The third is, I think I spoke a little bit about recognition earlier, and recognition is a challenge. It's changing rapidly. We are working a lot on it, but it continues to be a challenge, whether it comes to kind of families or universities or even corporate environments. The environment is still not as open to letting volunteers or to enabling volunteers go and do what they would really be passionate about doing. It still has kind of a lot of bindings, right? Okay, is work not more important? Do you have the boss on your side? Whatever the policy might say. So I think and this has also challenged a lot with a lot of multinational companies that have policies which are global in nature, but the implementation at a local or a regional or office level, there's a big gap. So how do we bridge that gap, and how do we bring the business side of people to understand all the values that we provide so that it's not seen as something on the side? I think those are some of the challenges. Thank you.
So I would just re-emphasize the measurement. I think that's something we're all in agreement with. So we'll have that in alignment in the room. Yeah. So I'll address something differently, which I think is, and actually I was really inspired by your comments, because I feel like what I see both in the corporate sector and in the nonprofit sector is emphasis on my intervention, my program, and the work that it's happening. So I'm really inspired when there are examples of people coming together to invest in this program that is doing good work and we see the proven impact. And so I would say is, the challenge is, we all, as companies, because of ESG and because of other things, we want to drive, we want the social impact we're doing as companies to drive towards our business agenda. And we want that to be in alignment, of course. But we need to not forget the societal agenda, which of course the SDGs is an example of a framework that tells us what the society's agenda should be. But I think we can't forget number 17 on that, which is the partnerships and the collaboration. That is really what is going to accelerate us forward. It is through partnerships, it is through multiple actions in combination together to systemically move us forward. So that's what I would emphasize. The challenge is the lack of partnerships and collaboration, but I think there are bright spots, and you're an example of that. So.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
And in Brazil also we can say that a challenge is budget.
Thank you for saying
Budget,
that.
budget,
I think we
budget.
can say that in most countries.
I don't know about you guys, but budget is a problem in each company when we are talking about corporate volunteer. So I think that's the main problem. And also connected to budget, we come with measurement. Because if we don't show what we are doing, or how important the actions are, and how impactant these actions are, company will not put more money on that. So it's connected. We see like, no budget, no measurement, we're done. So I think that's the main impact we have. And of course, bring the leadership closer to the program, to be committed with the action to the program. This is really important too, because if they are doing the job together with the volunteers, they will see how different it is and how important the actions are, and they can maybe change something in the company, because we need to have this in the lowest height possible in the company. So I think budget, management, have the leadership connected, and also connect our actions with the SDG. So we have to look, it's all about network. We have the SDG already plans for everybody around the world. Why we should reinvent it, everything? Let's go for the cheapest, the faster way. Let's do it in this way.
Okay. Como que de último no tengo mucho más que aportar, mentiras, pero creo que ahí alineado en ese sentido de cada quien empezando a hacer sus iniciativas de voluntariado por su lado, tratando de tirar para cada quien con su propia iniciativa, está muy centrado en el primer desafío que tenemos pues a nivel Colombia, y es un tema de mentalidad. Vencer una mentalidad individualista para pasar a pensar en una mentalidad un poco más grupal, un poco más de sociedad, por supuesto utilizando todas las herramientas de voluntariado para tal fin. En ese orden de ideas, una vez ese desafío lo que estamos empezando a superar, porque realmente en Colombia, si bien es cierto, muchos corporativos vienen trabajando sus iniciativas de manera independiente, estamos en una etapa primaria casi temprana de empezar a hablar de un voluntariado trabajando en red. Y creo que ahí es donde está el segundo reto, y es justamente concientizar a los actores de ese ecosistema que juntos somos más, que efectivamente podemos producir mucho más impacto en la medida en que nuestras acciones estén orientadas y articuladas en una red, y ese es sin duda alguna el segundo desafío. Y el tercer desafío es generar credibilidad en esos grupos de interés. Aún, por lo menos en Colombia, digamos, no tengo elementos o herramientas para compararme con otros países, pero a nivel sociedad y a nivel incluso de los negocios, que es donde mejor nos movemos nosotros, muchas veces la falta de credibilidad sobre la opinión o sobre el conocimiento de otros obstaculiza la posibilidad de recibir. Y ahí está el tercer desafío, y es generar ese cambio de mentalidad para de una manera abierta recibir conocimiento, recibir donación, recibir voluntariado, pues que en últimas siempre será un gran aporte. Sin duda alguna, tenemos que avanzar muy rápido en darle un rol más protagónico a los voluntarios. Creo que esa es la mejor forma de empezar a generar tracción sobre el tema. Y ese es nuestro cuarto y sobre todo hoy en día foco del tema de nuestra estrategia de voluntariado, y es cómo efectivamente le ponemos en primer lugar a los voluntarios, cómo en primer lugar de compartir experiencia, conocimiento y contactos de una manera generosa, efectivamente les genera trascendencia. Y sobre esa palabra que fue con lo que yo empecé, pues por supuesto queremos posicionar muy bien, y ahí estaría nuestro quinto desafío, posicionar muy bien el propósito de todo esto, y es que trasciendan quienes efectivamente están trabajando en voluntariado. Sería básicamente eso.
Thank you, Erik. You know, we hear a little bit, each one shared a bit about partnerships and what that has looked like, and JUNTOS, you guys are a great example of that. I think in a positive way, we're seeing that more and more in the world of organizations joining together, networks being formed, joining together to really tackle these social issues and the SDGs. And a huge trend we're seeing on this stage, and you know, probably many of you face this as well, is around the reporting aspect of impact. Speaking about informal volunteering and unstructured in India, and in terms of the laws of how do we really capture and measure that impact. I wonder if anyone has any thoughts on working through this challenge. Or is this something as a collective to be thinking more into the future on? It's a hard one.
Yeah.
While you guys are thinking of your brilliant answers and the solutions maybe, let's open it up to any questions from you guys that you might have.
Hello. Oh, good morning. I would like to know if you could share any best practice regarding corporate volunteering in factories, how to include all kind of employees, because we find like loads of constraints and difficulties to get to some people that can't leave their position or that don't have access to internet, you mentioned, and they actually can't or don't receive that information. So I don't know if you have any idea or any best practice regarding the volunteers that aren't in an office but in a shop or in a factory. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I can talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't work majorly with them, but I do have one or two experiences of this. It basically has two parts to it, right? The first is reaching them, because there's no email that is reaching them, right? They're on a shop floor possibly. So what we do with that is kind of identify some of the shop floor managers that might be there and kind of bring them into a meeting where we talk to them about a program that is coming up, and then ask them to kind of get on board their other colleagues. So different factories will have possibly different structures, but that's something that has worked for us. The other also is kind of making very simple announcements, or kind of having those notice boards right when people walk into a particular door in the morning, or sometimes even having those like just a simple desk with a table and two chairs and kind of little nice banner to attract people when they're walking in, because there's a lot of curiosity also. In terms of what kind of volunteering works, we realized that actually shop floor workers, I don't know, possibly in India because of the at the income level at which they are, they identify themselves much better with the community and their challenges than possibly office managers. And so actually we once we make that connect happen, the volunteering is much more easier. So all that we need to do is kind of organize for example, these factory workers to come to, let's say, an old age home or to a children's home, and then we don't really need to do as much as we need to do with the office managers. The reverse also happens nicely sometimes. What we've done is we've worked with some young people, like adolescent youth, who are looking for kind of jobs next, and are possibly working with a non-profit, are not working, are associated with a non-profit. We bring them to the factory and ask some of the shop floor workers to give them possibly a round of the factory to understand what kind of different processes are there, what roles do people play, and then that leads to something more about it.
All I would add is Points of Light doesn't necessarily have companies that we're directly working with with factory situations, but I guess our closest analogy would be the retail, people in retail, and we're working with a corporate client right now, and to your point exactly, Shalabh, is actually the awareness raising, and they might not have emails, but they have break rooms, and they have other that are their channels for communication, and so what we do is understand what those are, exactly what you said, and then the appropriate messaging around that to raise awareness for the programs or for even the concepts. And then again, talking about, I know you're talking specifically about volunteering, another thing we're doing is, it is likely that that retail worker, that might not be their only job or their only shift that they have as they take care of their family or do other things, particularly in the United States. But what we want to do is also just honor probably the other ways they are already engaging. And so part of the messaging we have is, you know, how potentially are you using, it's the civic circle again, but that'll be my message today. But what are the other ways you are probably already engaging? Because what we want to do is already recognize and celebrate what they're already doing, because if they have that recognition, not that I'm missing out on something, but I'm already doing things that matter, and then we hope that that creates a pathway and a spark that as you introduce the other programming that your company includes, they already feel engaged, and then therefore are guided towards those more structured paths.
We have a survey that was launched last year, 2021, that shows that 15% of the public in Brazil do corporate volunteer. And it's a huge quantity of people, like 34% of people that doing actually volunteering now, and that represent around 57 million Brazilians doing volunteer. So how to engage these people in their companies? How do companies do to get them to their volunteer programs? One thing they used to do a lot is what I mentioned before, it's gamification. So there are some companies using these tools to interact with people and challenge volunteers to participate, because they will be rewarded later on for this participation. And other thing is connect with the cause to the company business. Connect. If the employees is working there, they are already proud to be in this business. So maybe look for activities connected to the cause, for the company cause, will connect and engage more volunteers. One of the ideas they are using.
Bien, en nuestro caso nos preocupamos mucho por intervenir las dos puntas de este mercado. Nos preocupa mucho por entender la necesidad del empresario que va a ser beneficiario de voluntariado. Y nos preocupamos mucho por entender qué mueve al voluntario y en qué temas y su experiencia que lo hace mejor. Cuando el pequeño negocio nos dice quisiera un acompañamiento para atender temas de mercadeo, sabemos exactamente quién es la persona adecuada que quisiera estar con ese tipo de negocio, que tiene el conocimiento y la experiencia para acompañarlo, y eso hace que el match sea muy a la medida, por decirlo de alguna manera. Eso nos ha generado un nivel de compromiso muy alto a nivel de nuestros voluntarios, porque efectivamente sienten muy rápido, pueden visualizar además y sienten que su aporte ha valido la pena. Y creo que ese es lo que podría aportar en este caso.
Thank you, guys. Anyone else have any questions?
Thank you. Yes, I do have a question. I wrote it here, so I'm going to read. So my question is, incorporating lesson and learning into the corporate volunteer experience takes extra investment of time, and perhaps it takes longer to see the impact results of those engagements. So my question is, how do you build a case to companies that this approach is worthy and most meaningful?
What I would say is, that first of all, we invite anyone to help us make the case. To your point, like making the case, provides more investment to that. What I would say around listening and learning is, I think we all naturally feel the opinions, the influences that are around us, and the biases that are around us, and the multitude of information sources around us. So there is so right now, really the case right now is kind of a human-to-human connection and the experience we all have in terms of the influences that are around us and knowing that we feel that and saying we want to make sure that when we enter community, we're entering with their experience, not our experience as told to us through the influences that constantly surround us. So I think that's because everyone knows what's coming at us through our phones and through the media and through just through the bubble we surround ourselves by the people we surround ourselves. And I think what we're trying to also prove is that it does take a longer upfront time for listening and learning, but that the impact is actually better and more accelerated once you are instituting that programming in community. And so that's actually something Points of Light's working on right now to say, how do we prove that so that we can talk to companies and say, I think it's something we know, but something, how do we provide the evidence that shows it?
And these skills you develop in the human being, like leadership, communication skills, everything, it's a contribution about the volunteer environment. So it takes time to show results, but when you see that and when companies realize that, it's no way to go for it.
So we had an experience, we didn't think of it like that at that point of time, was we were speaking to the CEO of one particular company, and he was very interested in getting his senior management involved. So we actually got, I think it was 4 of his vice presidents to company, which will, let's say, number 3 level after this thing, to simply follow a community social worker for half a day. So just, what she is doing, and this was in a village. So what she is doing, you just need to kind of, just like you have an intern kind of, going on the first day and just being there. And obviously when they came back, they said, okay, this is exciting, and can I do this with my team? So, or something of similar nature. So we didn't think of it like that, but possibly it's this way. But you need access, obviously, at the right level to have that opportunity, because that itself needs significant amount of time investment.
Digamos que la visión que hay acá también nos ha venido acercando a que los corporativos entiendan que la manera más económica y más rápida de cambiar la cultura dentro de las mismas organizaciones. Cuando se toma de manera decidida la estrategia voluntariado en los corporativos, se está generando un lenguaje común en la organización, y ese lenguaje común es un movilizador hacia una cultura cada vez de cambio que le va a costar mucho menos al corporativo, y eso efectivamente hace que haya credibilidad y que se acelere un poco más rápido el tema al interior de la organización. Y eso es parte de lo que, digamos, en la oferta siempre tenemos, y es a menor costo y a menor velocidad el poder hacer cambios pronto dentro del corporativo para que lo incorpore.
Any other questions? So to conclude, and my final question to you guys, and feel free to answer as what comes to you, is we're hearing about all these shifts happening in our world right now, specifically around volunteering and corporate volunteering. What does that really require of us as organizations, as companies, as people? What does that require of us?
I'll just jump in because you nailed it with the last word, which was like as people. And Shalabh, one of your comments was like, put everything away and just remind ourselves that we don't have to put labels on it, employee, customer, consumer, like we are all people. And I think that's what it requires, is like taking a step back and reminding of that commonality, and just thinking about, what would we want, and what are our, basic needs and requirements as we want to engage, and just stripping all the rest of it away, and just focusing on people and the power we have individually, and then a reminder of the power that we have collectively. So again, back to partnerships too.
Required us empathy too.
Empathy. Thank you.
Empathy. We need to look to, and this is a very difficult. It's difficult for us to practice this every day, but I think that the volunteer program helps us doing that. So to open our minds and have more empathy for the other.
Yo lo definiría como desaprender. Creo que es una época en la que no debemos tener nada previsto como única verdad, sino por el contrario, tener mucha apertura. Creo que los tipos de voluntariado, los niveles de voluntariado y la forma de intervenir va a estarse modificando en los próximos años y de una manera acelerada. Por eso tenemos que estar abiertos a aprender sobre nuevas tendencias.
Listen and learn.
Yeah. I think, and this is coming from the conversations we were having over the last 2 days in our meetings as well, is about challenging our own limits and challenging what we have been traditionally doing and thinking, and challenging the comfort zone that we find ourselves in because of the organization that we are in or because of the programs that we've been leading or the partnerships that we have. I think there's a lot of conversation we had over the last 2 days about this, and I am thinking of this increasingly. Which will actually require us to unlearn, like you said, and kind of and then learn. Because when we challenge, you have to unlearn some of the set norms that we are used to, and then learn new ones. So.
Thank you very much, you guys. Appreciate you being
Thank you,
here.
Hannah.